switch this around a little bit. My office is a mess. Cool. So thanks for the time again. I really appreciate it. I think it's awesome what you're doing as far as the live streams too. Like the nightly thing has been great. So,
Oh, thanks, man. I appreciate it. Love the background, by the way.
oh, thanks. Yes. Figured it
Um,
was fitting to the topic.
yeah, for sure. Yeah, man, I this has just been super fun, to fire up a stream and talk to some people that don't make the rounds on the podcast and stuff like that, and just connect with other Bitcoiners out in the wild. So, I usually start unless you have other ideas, but maybe you can just give the origin story, and then we'll get rolling from there.
For sure. So I got exposed to Bitcoin actually super early, 2012, when people were doing some things with Bitcoin on the internet that some people may find questionable, I suppose is the best way to put it. So I had a friend explain it to me. I really didn't understand. I thought, this is just crazy and kind of stepped away from it at that point. Probably 2 years later, working at a call center, I had a really close friend, also brought it up to me a separate time and kind of tried to pursue it from there. And this was probably 2014. Tried to buy, really didn't understand the user interface at that point. Gave up, didn't do my research. I just thought this was, the next big thing, but gave it up. And probably right before the 2017 bull rally, I really started looking into it again. And 2018, right at the bottom of the bear market, lucky me, Christmas Eve 2018 was my first purchase.
Oh,
So
wow.
yeah,
It's pretty good timing, man, for,
yeah, lucky.
to
It
just
just
by,
really
yeah,
was
just
kind
by
of
sheer
fate. Yeah,
luck.
yeah, totally.
And so, what has characterized the journey since then?
So really what took me down the road actually is 2016, watching the elections, I just kind of hated both the candidates and ended up finding myself jumping down the libertarian rabbit hole. In doing so, I started reading some Rothbard, some Mises, Bastiat, things of that nature, and really found myself going into the economic side of it. And that's when I really started to pursue looking into something else. I actually found XRP first. And once I watched that raise to like $3 and dump, I was like, I don't know what I'm doing with this. And that was kind of my Bitcoin realization moment, I think. So
All right. So why did you how was XRP, like, how did that come before Bitcoin?
I honestly don't know. Lazy research, I guess, is probably the best thing I can think to put it at this point.
Really?
So, yeah, in retrospect, I just look at it and I was like, this was like the dumbest thing I could have done when first trying to dip my toe into this, basically. So, wise up to that pretty quickly. I don't want to necessarily call myself like a maxi or anything like that. Like I own a little bit of Ethereum, but that's mostly just because I played a terrible blockchain game, dumped my NFTs, and I'm trying to get out of my Ethereum at this point for Bitcoin.
Right.
Um, but yeah, like I said, XRP was really my learning experience to realize everything else is kind of a shit coin
Right.
and switch over to the Bitcoin side for sure.
Dude, if you come in at, like, let's say, I think the low was like December 16th, I want to say. Something like that, like of 18. And then 19 like started with a rip, basically. Like I think it was things started taking off in March. I want
Something
to
like that.
like
Yeah.
mid-March. Um, what were your, like, what was your reaction to that? Because you I'm sure you heard about it and you finally take the plunge, and then right out of the gate it starts ripping.
Yeah. So I mean, like I said, I kind of had seen everything happen in 2017 as well. I just kind of watched
You're
everything from the sidelines as well. So I
gotcha.
was like, I was already kind of a believer at this point. Like before I had bought, I'd really done the research to say, all right, this is what I think has a future. So like while it was awesome to see, it wasn't necessarily surprising to see. Kind of like where we're at right now, where it's like I just feel like we're kind of at this plateau in that 9,200 range, but Bitcoin's going to be Bitcoin, and I think we're going to be ripping again here pretty soon. So it wasn't a surprise. It was just cool to see.
Yeah. It's I kind of like, I don't take these sentiments around price, at least like my own, very seriously, because obviously, who knows what could happen, and
Mhm.
you think one it's going to go one way is going to happen and something else happens. And they were in such, uncertain, uncharted waters in the global landscape right now. Anything could really happen, but it does feel like something is brewing, right? I don't even know which way, but, it could go either way, but it does feel like, all the attention and all the action has been outside of Bitcoin right now. And I
Mhm.
feel, I think I said this before, but I at least, and this is just a total subjective sense, but when the tsunami kind of draws all the water out from the beach first, and it makes it look like the reverse is happening, and then it all floods in.
Mhm.
Alternatively, we could just stagnate for years. I think, what would be the implications of all this S2, the stock to flow model stuff, not coming to fruition? And even though I don't have a strong opinion on it one way or the other, to be honest. But uh, anytime when people are so sure of something happening in markets, you want to tread carefully.
Yeah, you
Um,
see that happening right now too. Like, traditional markets with all these Robinhood traders flooding in and everything. It's like
oh man,
you worry about things, people getting wrecked there, and Bitcoin. I think with the recent reduction in the distribution model is it's solid. I mean, there's so much money being pumped into the market right now from the Fed. It's like some of that I feel has to get absorbed into Bitcoin, and it's kind of the perfect storm as far as the timing goes. I think where we just recently had the reduction in the distribution, so
yeah, I
I'm
agree
I'm
with
looking
that.
forward, hopefully, to the upside. But yeah, I totally agree, man. We could stagnate for the next 2-3 years. We could break out of the S2F model, and
It's hard to
who
imagine that
knows?
we would, with, as you say, like all just the perfect storm of everything that's going on. But as they say, markets can stay irrational longer than you can
Yep,
stay solvent. So
100%.
Um, but yeah, you were talking about kind of having come into it or been an observer from so early on. You mentioned in when we were chatting on Twitter a kind of a message of hope around this stuff. What did you mean precisely by that?
Simply just how far we've come with, I'm not a fan of Coinbase, but simply the on ramps, the off ramps, the user interface is just infinitely better. I mean, again, thinking back to like I think of like I said, probably 2014 was the time where I just like had this conversation, went home, and was like, I'm buying some. Look through the avenues. Again, it was lazy research, but at the same time, seeing the interface then compared to how I'm buying Bitcoin now, it's night and day difference, man. So I think
Yeah.
that's a huge kind of sign for hope, really, that the community can continue to grow. As there's so many people that are building awesome things in the space.
Oh yeah, so much less friction. I mean, when I
Mm-hmm.
first looked at it, I think I was looking at Mount Gox, right? And I just gave up because I'm not doing all the legwork I need to send like a bank order or transfer to
Totally.
Japan and all that stuff.
Mm-hmm.
But one of my conversations with people lately around, because all these conversations are happening all the time now. How can they not in the context of government spending so much over the last few months? And people get the narrative, I think, of money losing value at a increasing rate. And I think they even, without too much like persuasion, can see part of Bitcoin's value prop in the kind of sound money lens. But the custody thing is a huge barrier for people
Yeah.
because it's such a paradigm shift in how you take responsibility for your own wealth and for your own savings. And people are very nervous about, like, people had so many conversations like, oh man, that sounds great, like I want a piece. And most people want it for NGU, right? Number go up. I mean,
Mm-hmm.
that's going to get cast the broadest net. But what but and there's, as you say, there's so many great apps and wallets that you can pick up Bitcoin very easily. But then it's like, well, what do I do now? And you tell them, well, you don't keep it on exchange.
Mm-hmm.
And then they're like, oh, so I need this like little device, and I have to, like, should I get this node thing that you're talking about? What's a node? And that part, I feel like I don't know how that gets smoother. Like, it may just be a case where this is an aspect of the change that inspires the behavior change that Bitcoin inspires. And part of that is the uncomfortable process of beginning to take more personal responsibility for, in this case, your financial life. And I don't know, absent like using custodians, if that can be like abstracted away or made more convenient or frictionless.
Well, I think some of these multi-sig wallets might help with that, where like you're only holding a shard of your key with a custodian type thing to where you're still retaining like majority ownership basically to where is, you still have that custodial power basically. But it is hard. I think it's kind of right now, like you go from the 2 foot kiddie pool into the 12 foot deep end of the pool real quick to where it's really easy
Right.
to step in, but it's really, really hard to continue to tread water as you go further down that hole. So lightning the lightning knows the Raspberry Pi, the lightning by Raspberry Pi, I think, or whatever, is pretty
Mm-hmm.
cool. How I think it's pretty much, I think, just like a drag and drop. You can set up like lightning nodes and stuff if you get the equipment for it. So I think people are trying to start taking those strides to make accessibility a little bit easier for like custodianship and things, but that is a super hard barrier to jump over right now, I think, and something that's really important that we do. So
Do you have these conversations with people in your meat space life?
Yes and no. I have a couple of friends that are somewhat into Bitcoin, but I'm from a pretty small area in the Northwest and there's not a lot of people around. So recently I have had some friends reach out and talk to me about it. And we're not quite to the point of here's how you custody your stuff yet. It's kind of more the do your own research stuff right now. And here's some helpful stuff to point you on the way.
Yeah.
Um, but yeah, it's something that's not very much talked about, unfortunately.
Yeah. Yeah. I'm because I often think about, to go back to price action, of course, for there to be the extent of price action that's being discussed of late, there's got to be a lot of new people to come on board, right? And that means that a lot of people have to educate themselves, and a lot of people have to be comfortable with these steps that we just described. And like, I think there's a gap between we see, and look, this could all be wrong, right? Because Bitcoin does its thing and it pumps like it's nobody's business, and you have no real, you don't know how or why that's happening. But in order for it to do that, people need to cross certain hurdles, and they can definitely cross the buy hurdle, right? So that's probably the majority of the pump. Like, you get set up with, let's not use Coinbase because I don't even want to, insinuate that you should go
No,
to,
totally.
let's say you're with Cash App, and
Swan,
you're
whoever. Yeah,
yeah, and
totally.
you're not on a DCA, so you just like, you can acquire it super easily, and so that is your impulse, like, contribution to the pump, let's say. But when it comes time to, um, do the extra legwork around kind of staying in it, and instead of just kind of buying it 1 month and selling it 6 months later and converting back into fiat,
Yeah.
that's where, I guess that's the hodl floor that incrementally gets bigger
Yeah.
over time, right?
And it totally does too. I mean, we saw it after, I mean, like the dump after 2017, it didn't go as low as it did previously because there's holders still, right? So, I
Yeah.
mean, it's something that we'll continue to see as the price action moves, where we will accumulate more holders and I think we'll lose over time as well. So,
Yeah.
at least that's the hope.
Yeah, I don't see any other way, man. Like, it's challenging to have these conversations sometimes with people, because we're total geeks, right? We've studied the monetary history and the economics and the technology and so many different components of this that it becomes increasingly unavoidably obvious. And I know that's incredible. Like, there's so much hubris in that statement, and so I'll just preface it by saying, or maybe I'm wrong, right? But if not, if it turns out to be right, then it will be regarded as, or be looked back on as, being so incredibly obvious.
Mhm.
And
We're
it,
almost already there, man. Best performing asset over the last decade and
well, so
everything.
you say, and so I say,
You're
right? But
right, but from
it's
somebody on the outside, totally, it's hard to see.
right. It's still
But
relatively easy to dismiss it, and even if they accept that it's been the best performing asset, they don't know why, really, because maybe it's kind of in a box of, oh yeah, new tech will be something someday, not really understanding kind of all the different value props that it represents and all the different things that it's pulling from to be what it is.
why do you think that is, though?
Why do I think that people like don't see that?
Yeah, like what do you think keeps them away from it? Like, do they just not understand scarcity kind of thing, or is it just not they don't understand the tech and they don't think there's value behind it, as there's nothing, physical behind it type thing? That always seems to be like the age-old argument, I feel like, is that, there's nothing backing this, how do I trust it type thing. But I don't know if we're still at that phase or not.
I think that comes up like once people start the discussion, what backs it, and you have to, get into that conversation. But I honestly think that people just don't care. I think the status quo is incredibly intoxicating. And when you're in it, you're drunk off it. And you just think this is the way things are supposed to be.
Mhm.
And as long as things aren't in your face falling down around you, and I say that, I'm like, well, in certain respects it is. But if you don't like this, it can be so, you can be so accepting of the status quo that you don't even look for signs that that something may be wrong. And if you're closed off to that, then and if you're not interested in understanding how any of it works, and you just totally accept it for what it is, uh why would you be looking, how could you see the value in something like Bitcoin? Because you don't see even one iota of the problem. It is what it is. So and in that context, I think that's why a lot of people get into it for like the quick buck, get into it for the pump. and then get out of it just as quickly because, they got the pump or they got burned, and then they're out again. But it's alarming to me, especially today with, seemingly relatively large degree of turmoil, and presume, probably more on the way, that those questions don't arise more frequently. But it just seems they flare up, and I guess people focus on the very kind of minutia or the specific symptom of the turmoil and not the cause. And you
Yeah,
know
I mean, we saw it flare up with like Ron Paul in 2008, and like the whole Tea Party movement that rose was a lot of that was the economic side of things that had happened from the '08 crisis. So yeah, I guess I could understand you get those bubbles that rise up basically of that tension. They just as quickly disappear. But
and
I
maybe we'll see something like that again. Who knows?
I think we're already there, right? With all the unrest, unfortunately, that we are seeing right now. To some degree of it, it's people are fed up with the way that things are. And I think a lot of that comes back to the whole fix the money, fix the world type thing. And it's just such at the root of the problem. But it's so hard to understand because,
Right. And it's
you
so
have to
hard to
challenge
say
your whole
that.
life, basically. Everything that's basically, keeping you supported is what you have to challenge at that point. And it's hard. So
Exactly.
worth it once you do, though. So worth it.
Yeah, totally. But it's so hard. It's so hard to even say that in the way that the dialogue is so charged these days.
I am
Like,
character or whatever his name is did it great,
oh,
man. That guy on Twitter, dude, I love that video. I
yeah,
love
that
it.
was an awesome video, and I'm so glad he did it. I hope, like, I'm trying to connect with him to get him on the pod, but that was awesome because in that context, everyone expects you to say, whatever the usual talking points of that movement are, and he, had the balls and the intellect and the whatever else to get up and be like, no, it's not about that. It's
Mhm.
about this. Let's bring some attention to this matter because this is the real lever of change that we need to focus on. And good for fucking him, man. I
Yeah,
hope I
totally,
hope
right? That's
I
where you got
hope
to
it
start. That's where you got to
I hope
start.
it
You get an
spurs
audience.
like 10 more like
Here.
him. And every
Yeah,
time, there's a protest like this, at least and I'm usually kind of negative on the protest, but like if that's how you're going to approach them, like you get all this attention generated, all this energy, and then you smack them with like the real, a real
that's hard to
viable
say too,
option.
because it is such like a serious topic with everything with like all the brutality and stuff that has happened or whatever. But like at the same time, there's a much bigger issue at the root of the problem. It's so hard to cross that bridge, but if more people can keep doing it like that,
Right.
maybe we'll start getting through to more people. And I think that's super important because it's probably the most important message that people could hear right now.
Yeah,
So
and you sound super insensitive, like when you don't pay lip service to like what the messaging is of
totally,
whatever the issue is.
totally.
But culture today seems so susceptible or so determined to just fight out the base level or the highest level symptom of a problem, and just to really not go whether it's the virus or whether it's Black Lives Matter or whether it's any other issue. It's like just focus on the most obvious in your face symptom to latch onto and to pick a side from, and not dig deeper. Let's collect all the facts first. Let's collect all the data first. Let's have a calm like discourse about what this issue really is and what's and like and to understand what the issue really is, we need the data, as best data as we can gather. And then let's talk about a variety of viable solutions and discuss the merit of each. Right. But obviously, that's so far from what's happening today. What's happening
Mhm.
today is just who can yell louder over the other person, who can virtue signal harder, who can get someone canceled first, you
Yeah.
know?
Yeah, it's really unfortunate to see as well. And there's kind of two sides to that coin as well, where like we see what's happening with the people and we see what's happening with like our leadership right now too. So like Justin Amash, I think it was in Congress, introduced something to end qualified immunity, which I think is something positive that can come from this. And it's been a positive, really quiet message for probably the last 10 years, 15 years within like the Libertarian Party at least. So that's
What
been
is
kind of
it?
cool to see. Ending of qualified immunity, whereby police basically aren't able to be sued by the public unless they have already shown signs of exhibiting this negative behavior on the force type thing. So I
Yeah,
think there was like
I think
some
small
reform might be
small
good
improvements, yeah, and
for
small
sure, but we got
reforms,
to find where those are for
right?
sure.
And they can be established. I guess what my criticism is often how, like, what's the effort versus reward? Like, you put in all this effort and all this energy and all this attention into getting relatively, on the grand scheme of thing, minor changes input, albeit like ones that you want and ones that hopefully will result in a positive impact versus like that same degree of energy and attention, if brought to another level of that issue, could have such a greater impact that's where I want it to be.
Mm-hmm.
But if you
Yeah,
say that, it gets construed as you don't care about the
exactly.
issue, right?
Mm-hmm.
Which is not the case at all. But
It's just a short-sighted view, unfortunately. It really feels like, because that people don't really look past to what is the actual end goal and how can we maybe get there. It's just, I want end goal, I want it now, and that
right,
really short-sighted view is unfortunate. It's going to create a lot of this friction that we're seeing right now, and
totally.
got
And
to
so
find some way
much
to move past
emotion,
that.
man. Like
Yeah.
it's just I keep harping on this, but like everything today is emotion and impulse, like in these broader issues. And if that's how we're going to get down, I mean, it's going to be a rough ride for everyone who continues engaging that way. Like, we've got to use logic and reason and the best information or data that we can gather to make decisions, if we're going to attempt to make decisions as any kind of a collective society at all. Now, you may make the argument like we shouldn't do that. Let's all just be sovereign individuals, and I'm totally down with that. But that's not where we are right now, right?
Yeah. Yeah.
But it's so disheartening when you see that's the level on which the discourse is happening.
Yeah.
Alternative to that, it makes me so much more jazzed that Bitcoin exists, because I don't have to feel like that badly that things are going down that way, because there is something else that at least I can engage in, and I know lots of other people are as well, that will serve me and will serve the other people that do so. The other people that do so. So
Yeah, and doesn't it just feel so good to opt out, man? Like every time I see
so
stats pop up,
fucking good.
like, yeah, yeah, 100%. Like, I don't know what it is. It's just super euphoric. Like, you get that endorphin drive for sure. At
Oh
least every
man,
time I do when I stack sats.
dude.
So
Oh, I'm 100% with you. Like,
yeah.
I look forward to doing it, and even if it's like
Mhm.
inconsequential amount, it's
Yeah.
still you just still get like a dopamine hit from doing it, because you know what it represents. You're staking a claim to a limited territory, let's say,
Hmm.
and it's just another like expression that you're putting, you're opting into this and not engaging in that.
Totally. I love the idea of the only two things that we've really truly realized that are scarce in our lives are Bitcoin and our time, basically. Like, it's so hard for people to understand true scarcity, that like, that's part of what gets me. Is it's just like, this I know is going to be this, it's always going to be this. Like, I can wake up and look at a $20 bill in my wallet, and I don't know if it's worth $21, if it's $18. I can look at my wallet, I know exactly how many sats I have are going to be how many sats I have, and the only thing that can get better is their buying power. So it's killer, man.
Yeah, and I like, I'll be out for a run or doing something, and I'm like, once you get into this stuff, it's impossible. Like, what's the line from the Matrix? Like, once you see it, you can't unsee it, or something like that. And I'm
Yeah.
always, every issue now, and again, I know this sounds crazy to some, but it's seen through that lens, and it becomes so obvious how many different things in our culture, and perhaps like the whole culture itself, is so much a result of the nature of the money on which it's predicated, and all
Bitcoin
of
changes
these,
you, man.
right, and all of these
So many people
issues
talk
that
about
we
that.
see, and ones that even the most ardent Bitcoiners, there hasn't been like very well articulated causation or relations done to these things yet. But in your kind of moments of clarity, whether it's in your shower, you're out for a run, or whatever your thing is, you can just trace it, and you can see kind of the string of causality from that issue to where it starts on the money, and how it would be different if the nature of the money in the society was different. And it weirdly gets me off. I'm just like, I'll just be there like, huh, like I never noticed that connection before. And then you see it, and it just adds to your whole, infatuation with this thing.
Yeah, yeah. So many people have talked about that, man, where Bitcoin does change you, and it changes you for the better. And like, I can certainly say I've noticed from the time that, thinking back, I would kick my own ass when I was 20 compared to now when I'm almost 30 type thing, for the high time preference decisions I was making compared to now. So I think a lot of that positive change came from Bitcoin too. So I think that aspect alone has been enough to keep me in the space and keep me incredibly excited about the space too. It's just what it can do at just a personal level, not even just the financial level. So
Yeah, yeah, totally agree. Have you, like, a lot of people that become so passionate in their engagement in this alternative system that is Bitcoin, like try to find ways to contribute in yeah, try to find ways to contribute. Have you ever done that? Have you ever given any thought to it? I'm not saying you should. I'm just wondering if like you've ever been compelled.
So I've actually been thinking and starting to try to script out kind of a longer series of what is Bitcoin, what is money, introduction videos, just to get people exposed to it that I can give to my friends. Again, probably in the last month or two, I'd had 3 to 5 people that I've just known over the years just kind of randomly reach out, and it kind of got me thinking, well, like if people are going to start to take interest in this, I would like to try to at least help put them down what I feel to be the right path, basically, with it. So
Right.
slowly started working on that. I actually work as an independent contractor and keep myself quite busy with that. So it's kind of hard to find the time, but it's definitely been something on my radar and that I would love to do to help people grow with it, I suppose. So
Yeah. Yeah. And again, I don't say that like you should. I just know that, I mean, anytime when you see something of such great value and positive impact, you tend to want to find other ways to engage in it, I guess, other than
yeah.
just, keeping it for yourself.
Yeah, had never really been something that crossed my mind, but as that happened, it is just like you said, something that kind of draws you into it. It's like, this is so interesting. Why do I not engage in it further? Type thing is definitely the way I've thought of it. So
What's taken, like what are you finding most juicy or interesting or compelling these days? Like what are you reading? What are you trying to learn more about?
so actually right now I'm reading The Art of War by Sun Tzu.
Nice, nice.
I'm just finishing that up actually. Um, as far as just like personal things, I've kind of been taking some time off of trying to be too studious. I've got another son on the way in 2 months. So
Oh,
uh,
congratulations.
thank you very much. Yeah, I've got a lot of preparation for that right now. But yeah, just kind of reading The Art of War, working, raising the family, doing that whole thing. So
The Art of What's funny you mentioned that book because I read it a long time ago, but I spent the night at my cabin last night, and my niece and nephew were like staying in the spare room a couple weeks ago, and they play with the bookshelf and grab books out, and they don't know what they're doing, but they're just throwing it all around. And The Art of War was on the night table when I went to bed last night, and I picked it up like I underline all my books, right? And you pick it up, and there's really so many great like one-liners in that book that are timeless, really.
yeah, it's
Um,
awesome. I really wasn't a book that was on my radar, and probably 6 months ago, somebody on, I think it was Pomp's podcast, mentioned something about like it's crazy if you read The Art of War and think just replace a few words thinking about it from like the avenue of finance. So I was like, what the hell, give it a whirl, and I've been reading that now, and it's pretty interesting to see the how closely they can compare. So
do you track, like, do you spend much time kind of tracking or listening to commentators and content in the traditional finance space to try to get a read on how quickly things are devolving or what's changing and that kind of stuff?
I'll try to just kind of keep an eye on like headlines that pop up on my news feed, but unfortunately, most of my podcasts are allocated either to. So I work in IT, so just like system admin podcasts or Bitcoin podcasts. So,
Right, right. Do what kind of like what's your line of work?
so I just do like the Active Directory administration, help with project management, contract administration. So I live in Idaho, but I work with a firm out of the Bay Area.
Right.
They have an office up here, and just kind of help support everything for those guys. So
Cool, man.
yeah, it's nice.
What's Idaho like? I've heard I haven't been there, but in Citadel talk, there's it's sometimes thrown out as like a potential or prospective place. What's it like up there?
It's so great. I've been trying to slowly pressure Wartime Hoddle if he happens to be listening to get up here for it because it's the perfect spot for it, really. There's beautiful land, it's super quiet. Idaho's actually a pretty chill spot. Yeah, I think it's probably top 3 states for Citadels, I would say. I'd go Montana, Wyoming, Idaho would definitely be the 3 spots that we got to end up. So
And what would you judge Citadel spots on for you personally?
open space. We got to have natural resources. We got to have good access to water and ability to grow our food. That's probably about it. Other than that, we can take care of ourselves.
What about like gun laws and stuff? Is that
Oh,
important?
let it be. So I tend to side more towards like ANCAP. So like you can ask me anything towards that, and I'll just be like, yeah, let's have all the guns. So
In Idaho, is it like an open carry state?
yeah, it is.
Right. And
Yeah,
is there
they 18 and up, 18 and over open carry, no permit if I'm not mistaken.
And there's just a shit ton of space and not that many people. Is that the idea?
Yeah, so like I live in Boise and there's probably 200,000 people in this area here, but outside of that, the rest of the state is like maybe max 50,000 in one area and there's a ton of land in between. So,
Is that it? There's only 200K people in Boise?
yeah. Yeah, whole surrounding area. Boise itself, I think like 180,000, but we have all those small towns that kind of tap up to us to make about 250.
Right.
So,
And so, because I know a lot of people are thinking and talking about now, like where should the time may soon come, sooner than expected, where you actually have to think about jurisdictional arbitrage and making a move. And as you say, Hoddle is moving to the country, as he says. But what are you satisfied with where you're at long term? Like Idaho, you think is a good place to
so I think Idaho
land on?
100%. I talked to my wife all this week actually. We're renting a home right now, but our lease is up in about 9 months. So we've been talking and like, all right, we're gonna buy. Do we buy land? Do we buy a house? What do we want to do? And I'm totally pushing for the land side of things. If I can just get a hold of like 2, 3 acres just out of town, I'll be a happy guy. So,
And just build something like conservative on it initially and
mhm.
build on it over time.
Yeah, like here in the city, we built a little garden and stuff. So we're already kind of growing our own food and things like that. So we would just kind of extend that out into a bigger space. So
Nice,
yeah.
nice. Yeah, man. I think, well, I was actually just talking, right, an hour before we came on here with a guy who's doing, it's called Regen Village, and it's a, for lack of a better term, sustainable community project,
Mhm.
very technology oriented, as you might expect, grow your own food, energy capture, all environmentally friendly, that kind of stuff, which is really cool. And it'd be interesting to see if that and other projects that are like it can actually be pulled off. But I was kind of asking him more questions like what's the state of the tech as far as individuals are concerned? Because, to each their own, if you want to live in like a community of whatever, like-minded or whatever people, so that's great. And maybe, that's what certain citadel visions are off into the future. But I think at least the interim step is everyone just becomes self-sufficient and independent first, right?
Hmm.
So that
Yeah,
you can
totally.
make, so that you can, make independent decisions and access and experience that degree of freedom. And then afterwards, perhaps down the line, if you want to hop around jurisdictions and spend some time, and if there's, I'm sure benefits will emerge to doing so. But yeah, just being independent and not requiring other people for the essential services of your life. That would
Hmm.
be a
That's the
incredibly
dream
liberating
everywhere, man.
experience. Yeah. Well, for us, right? For us,
Yeah,
I say,
yeah, totally.
and yeah, and it's starting to trickle down, but again, with the kind of intoxication of the status quo, I mean, like a lot of people are not. I don't think they see and or have a problem with the level of dependence right now,
Yeah.
and
But the hard thing is that the further down that slope that we slide, it's a lot harder to get back up and get back out of it, kind of thing, right? So it's one of those things where if we don't fight to push for those freedoms and those liberties now, if we fall, we're probably not going to get back up, man. So
yeah. But see, this is the thing. I don't think we consciously get out of these problems, right? Like I don't think we're gonna have like a mass shift in uh, perception and stuff. Like I don't see all the people that are both creating and engaging in failing systems right now, uh, giving them up until
yeah.
they actually do fail,
Hmm.
right? And so the kind of the milder version of that is I don't think they'll be interested in something like Bitcoin until the thing that they're used to and comfortable with and that's quasi serving their purposes now fails.
Yeah,
And
but we're in such
so
unprecedented times. We might be on our way there right now, kind of thing. Like you mentioned, there's so much just craziness happening. Like, what if we are truly witnessing kind of the final death, death knell for fiat type thing? And like, how quickly does that just absorb into something like Bitcoin? I mean, we'll see gold flare a little bit, but I think a lot of that's going to get pushed into Bitcoin if that's truly what's happening. So,
that's the big question, man, right?
yeah,
That's, and I'm the person amongst my friends who is obviously as I am. So I talk about these things, and most people say, yeah, it's not great, but everything will be more or less fine.
mhm,
And the thing is like they may actually be right. I can't like I wouldn't put money on it, obviously, and I can't see how the level of abuse that's currently happening can be can persist for a tremendous amount longer. But you know, I
It's just so
it's
crazy to think that how short of a time it's been, right? Since like 71 is when you really see like a huge pump on like the Fed's ass or the Treasury asset like balance sheet. It's just crazy, man. Like it's
it,
happening so quickly that it's like how much longer can we kick that can down the road type thing.
right. And
It's
but
tough to
even in
tell.
2008, I thought it couldn't be kicked down the road that much longer.
Yeah.
And here we
Yeah.
are, you know, 12 years later, and it's been kicked down the road. And maybe there's another decade of kicking it down the road. And as long as the insidious effects of doing so are gradual enough that people can adapt in a way that's not too shocking to their, you know, their normal lives or their habits, then maybe it's passable. You know, maybe, I
Yeah.
mean, look at
There's a lot of
Venezuela.
deceiving tactics to pass it off. Like shrinkflation's the biggest one. I heard something the other day, just like the Snickers bar example or whatever, right? Where it's like over the course of like 5 years, the Snickers bar gets like 1 ounce smaller or something like that. And it's like you're paying the same amount. And it's, that kind of shit happens everywhere where it's just really deceiving and it looks as though we're continuing down that path, but really people are just losing their buying power without realizing it. So
Right.
maybe that is people just being complicit in it as it continues to be kicked down the road, I guess. But it's shitty to see happen nonetheless.
Did you listen to Brady on Citizen Bitcoin interview the guy from Venezuela recently?
I don't think I have, no.
So anyway, you know, Venezuela is, you know, the poster child for like things going great, like the boom era, and then just going all to
Yeah.
hell. But even so, like with the insane amount of inflation they've had over the last few years, like, and I use this term extremely loosely, but they're still functioning, right? Like Maduro is still in power, and like it's, from all accounts, it's a like many people are having a horrible experience there, right? Because price
Mhm.
signals are destroyed, and that means shortages, and that means all that other stuff.
Yeah.
But like society still exists, I guess is what I'm trying to say.
Hmm.
And you know, he hasn't been overthrown or whatever yet. And like if that is a much smaller, much less ingrained system that can hang on tooth and nail despite the tremendous like dislocation and perversion of that system, how long may one such as the US system and the US dollar persist?
Too
You know?
long. It scares the shit out of me to think about that too, right? Because again, how far can we let it go? And if we're just having quality of life degrade throughout the process of that, that just the whole process sounds miserable and it really sounds like, we as a society or a Bitcoin community really need to stand up and try to get people on our side because that just sounds like a terrible, terrible life, man.
Yeah. And you know, the other thing I've thought about recently is in 2008, the gold bugs and the libertarians, you know, the sound money people were ringing the bell, and they were saying this is going to lead to bad outcomes. We can't print this much money. We can't intervene in the markets this much. And gold had a terrible decade, you know, and I wonder, is that because obviously the money flowed into other financial assets, and that's fine, but does it not simultaneously mean that the sound money narrative is not that important to like money allocators around the world? Because surely some should have been concerned if sound money was, you know, if the degradation of money was something that they saw, and I'm sure many did because they're not stupid, they understand the impacts of this type of intervention. Uh, but gold just shat the bed for the whole decade.
Yeah. Yeah, that's I don't know. It's difficult to think about because again, part of me wants to just say I don't think people truly understand scarcity, but the whole, central banking is just a game anyway. So what if like the concept is really just money is going to continue to inflate. Any amount of money works for an economy. Therefore, if we can just stay ahead of inflation to where we're making the most money, there's no incentive to change from the structure. You know what I mean? So I think people are incentivized to kind of want to stay under the current system if they're a successful major industrial, or a major financial industry, basically, that can command power over that economy to where they're coming out ahead.
Yeah.
That's hard.
Right. And
It's
another
dependent on people then. So
another interesting question, which, you know, is for someone living in Venezuela, would be, you know, people obviously prefer US dollars
mhm.
because they know that it buys them more and it depreciates less quickly or not at all in terms of how long they hold it, right? But I almost doubt that most people are seeing it through the lens of sound money and the like the lesser of two evils of unsound money. I think they probably just make like a very pragmatic financial decision, like, oh well, the bolivares are shit, and the U.S. dollar is way better, stores its value more, and I can buy more with it, so I want that. But I wonder if even as far like down that kind of unfolding or the collapse of their system is like the concept of sound money even in the public consciousness.
Mhm. So I heard, I think was it Peter McCormick went down to Venezuela as well and did an interview down there, and it sounded like a lot of people down there, people may have known about what Bitcoin was, but it wasn't necessarily used in kind of their daily lives, is what I heard as far as his kind of boots on the ground account of it. So
That was my
it was really
impression, yeah.
interesting to hear. It was really interesting to hear that, as you would think that in a society where there's no, like you said, the buying power of your dollars just degrading literally from the time you go to sleep to when you wake up, like something that Bitcoin does fluctuate quite a bit, I guess, even in comparison to the dollar, and that may be why they're drawn to it. But anything that's hard money that's accessible, I would think they would try to transact in. But
Yeah.
if that's not the case, it's hard for me to think that that's truly the case. But
And that kind of troubles me about the way we look at, the US, Canada, Western Europe, other areas of the world, in that will we just like it's always important to remember that everything is always unfolding. It's not like one steady state to another steady state outcome, right? It's always just unfolding. And the inequality and the turmoil and the kind of the fertile soil for all the things that are bubbling up today was, is a result of many of the interventions that have gone on, yes, since, 1913, 1971, 2008, and all the different, the inequality, I guess, to use a broad term, that causes these things to bubble up, is a result, I think, in both of our opinions, at least in large part, due to the nature of the money. And
yeah, the
so if we're
cancel-on effect, essentially, right? Where it's
right, right,
trickling down to the consumer at really the last stage where it's already lost enough buying power that they're kind of fucked with it. So
right, and so
yeah,
if most people aren't recognizing that now, then, and obviously some are, but in relative terms, then even if it gets worse and worse and worse, will people just be continuing to fight because of the circumstance they're in, rather than address the reasons for the circumstance? Will we always
yeah.
just will people ever turn the kind of spotlight to the cause, or are we just doomed to, no matter how? Because this conversation, we're kind of saying, well, when things get bad enough, people recognize the need for something like Bitcoin, but maybe they won't, because they'll
It
misconstrue,
can't
right?
kind
They'll
of thing.
misconstrue everything, and they'll think the problem is the symptom rather than the actual underlying cause, and that doesn't bode well for mass shifting to something better.
Yeah, and it's really hard on that front too when you have people really just kind of treading water to get by right now in a lot of places where
Totally.
it's, they don't have disposable income to invest type things. So trying to do so in something that's seen as a risky asset, something they don't understand in the form of Bitcoin, it's a really, really big hurdle for most people to try to jump over, I think. And that's the hardest part is people are already in such a tough spot where they don't necessarily have the expendable income to invest in assets. And that keeps them away from Bitcoin as well. So
And it keeps them in such a state of kind of desperation or
yeah.
anxiety too,
Hmm.
just from a mental component. And again, this is why inequality has these insidious symptomatic effects, on higher levels, because people are already kind of primed to be angry, to be anxious, to be fearful, to be, you know, um, unhappy. And then so when things actually pop off, they're kind of like they're ready to go. They're ready to engage in that stuff. And as you say, they haven't had the wherewithal to choose it, to do that opt out that we often talk about. I mean, it's very, very difficult.
Yeah. And right now there's some extra money that's feeding in. And I think that's why you're seeing the retail pump in traditional markets right now, unfortunately, is there's a lot of uncertainty. And if these people are keeping their jobs, these people that are on unemployment getting these additional benefits are just like, woo, free money type thing. What do I do? I don't know if I'm going to keep my job. Let's try to make $1 million in the stock market type thing. And like, it's super dangerous as well. Like, Just it worries me right now. Times worry me, people worry me, human action worries me. It's just crazy, man.
And what gives you faith? What gives you hope, rather?
Bitcoin. Bitcoin. That's pretty much it, man. The hope that we can eventually get enough people to understand that there's a better financial system that can free them from this shitty mess that we're in. So that's
Well
pretty much
said,
it in a
man.
nutshell.
Well said. Yeah, it really does all come back to Bitcoin,
I
unfortunately.
hate to say that. Yeah, I talk when I do talk to my friends. I have some people that like. I think part of the reason they stay away from Bitcoin is because I talk so damn much to
Right.
Bitcoin about at least this one guy kind of thing, and it always just comes back to that. They'll be like, "Well, what about this issue?" And I'm like, "Well, this and this and this," and then Bitcoin, and it's like, "Fuck, I lost him again," type thing. So,
Yeah. And if like, and my experience is exactly the same, to the point where we probably do it a disservice, right? Because
Mhm.
we could probably address it if our ultimate intention was to shill as effectively as possible, then we might construct a more like sensible or diluted approach, right? But I just can't get away from the truth of the matter, and I
It's
kind
such a
of
powerful message, man. It's hard to get away from that, right?
right,
It's
and I
it's such a
refuse
powerful
to
message. It's
censor it
hard.
just to
Yeah,
be, just to come off as a moderate, you know.
don't water it down. Let's say you get people that like Young asked me to buy XRP, as if you water it down and they don't understand the importance of something like a Bitcoin. That's how these assholes buy XRP to start. So
That's a good point. That's a good point. Yeah, man, it's such a privilege is the word that comes to my mind to be living during these times. Like if you, because I mean, presumably the world has been, young people. I always think this is, kind of a weird thought, I guess, but I went to Egypt when I was like 20 years old or something, and I was sitting on one of the pyramids at Giza, just out looking over like the landscape, and I was just thinking, like, at some point throughout history, or probably many points throughout history, even during the time that these were constructed, it's all mostly just normal people, right? You have the pharaoh and his minions, and then just normal people. So like two dudes, a boy, like a guy and his girlfriend, an old couple would be walking along the Nile someday, shitting on the government, talking about the pharaoh, like, that's been
yeah,
happening since the beginning of time, right?
yeah, history tends to
And
repeat itself.
yeah, and in all of those instances, the only ever option was acquiescence or violence.
Mhm.
And violence usually only led to temporary solutions because they could not be maintained other than through violence, and they could only be unseated through violence as well. So it's kind of this virtuous cycle. So, but we find ourselves at this historical moment where that dynamic has changed.
Yeah, third
Not
fork
to
presents itself.
Yeah, and
Yeah,
not to say it's the end of violence and there won't be violence and all that kind of stuff, but the actual resting the actual mechanism of maintaining power from these structures is now, one has emerged that's actually effective and that can be more long lasting, and that doesn't require uh, as violent a methods or even violent at all methods as before, and that's just crazy exciting. It's
yeah.
such a,
The
as you
hope
said
thing,
it.
man.
Yeah, exactly. It's such a hopeful message, right?
Yeah. Yeah, it really is. It's so powerful too. That's why it's hard to, when you're trying to shill it, you can't dilute it because it's just that in and of itself, it's such a huge paradigm shift, man, that you can't downplay it. And it's just too powerful. So
How long do you think? Let me see how I'm going to phrase this question. I guess the most direct way to frame this is when, if and when, if you think hyper Bitcoinization, like a global Bitcoin standard, is going to happen in the future, how far in our future do you think that is?
25 years, and I say that because I know that my 2-year-old son will never have gone through a time in his life where he didn't know about what Bitcoin was, understand as he gets older how he can use it to where it's something that is natural. Switching away from something like a financial system that dictates our whole life is pretty difficult, but it's getting to a point now that we have these super young kids that are going to be coming up that they're just not going to understand a world without Bitcoin. And I think that's when you really start to see it take hold because it's so powerful that when that's something that you've been around and exposed to your whole life, you really understand that. And I think that's when we'll start to see a shift for it. So 20, 25 years, maybe a little bit longer than that, but I think that's when we could really see it, at least from like a perspective shift.
Yeah. And in those cases too, they won't have that legacy comfort and familiarity with the legacy system to overcome, right? They just kind of, whenever your consciousness kind of emerges as, whether it's when you're 7 or 12, or when you start thinking about such things as money and this, work and stuff, and you look out, and if you're just comparing them equally, not because you've got no kind of track record with either, then it's hard to imagine you'd pick the clunky, expensive, corrupted, censored legacy system over the antithesis of that.
Yeah, unless you're heavily incentivized through some crazy corrupt scheme or something to embrace their method, I don't think that you could. It's, the hard or the good money beats out sound money type thing. And I think that all money eventually just does get eaten up by Bitcoin. It's just it's so much better at fulfilling the roles of money that it's so hard to think that it couldn't eventually win out, basically.
Yeah. And I've often compared it to, like the internet as a means of acquiring information and gathering information versus like a newspaper. And because in that context, newspapers still exist even after the internet's been around and easily accessible for, 20 years. But some people are more familiar with it. They're comfortable with it. It's a habit. And so it kind of made me think, well, will we just have this bifurcation? And that bifurcation could be the situation for a very long time, because, you might have to, it may be just a generational change, right? So anybody who's developed a comfort level with the legacy system will have to kind of die off, basically.
Yeah, unfortunately.
Well,
humans are creatures of habit, man.
That
it's
could
just
totally
kind of
happen.
the fact of life. So
that could totally happen, but there's way stronger incentives when it comes to money than information, I feel, right? So like if we're just talking about newspaper versus Twitter and how you get your information and how you become an informed person in the world, well, people want to be informed and there's a certain incentive there and whatever. But, people are way more strongly motivated by their financial incentives. And so if that is true, and if Bitcoin leverages that, then perhaps, it won't be so easy to be outside the system, I guess. It won't be so easy to ignore it, so that may mean that there's not quite the same bifurcation as there is in the newspaper internet dynamic.
Yeah, that is interesting. I would hope to see it play out over time. I think it's just one of those things where we just consistently adopt holders, and the network just will continually expand. It's just, I don't see, I know I've said this several times, but I don't see more people dumping than I see more people adopting as time goes on, with just the general unrest and it seems the general consciousness of society right now. So people seem to be getting fed up, and this is again that way to opt out. And it's really inspiring for me to see that right now, where like public perception seems to really hate where we're at. There's kind of this golden road, so to speak, that offers at least a potential to get away from that. And it gives me hope. I just can't get over how hopeful it is for me. So.
Totally, man. Totally. And it's so goddamn easy. You don't have to write your congressman. You don't have to go protest. You don't have to do this and that. You can, you just do something that ultimately also benefits you. It just has the double whammy of having a personal individual incentive and a broader, social level positive impact as well.
Yeah, I strategically moved myself 2 blocks away from the only Bitcoin ATM in my town, so I can just walk down the street. I don't have to ask anybody, and I can just throw $20 in if I need to one day or whatever. You know what I mean? So it's awesome. It's great.
How many? What kind of charges are those things on? Is it like 5% or something like that?
I don't know. I haven't bought through them in probably a year or so, but this one wrecked you. There was like no KYC AML, which I always thought was kind of sick, but
they charge you for it.
It's like, dude, it's like 12%, 13%, some insane premium on it last time. I was like, yeah, I don't want to do this.
All the ones I've encountered over the years have been kind of bad like that too. But who do you think's selling right now? Back to the price discussion. Have you spent much time on digging into that kind of stuff?
I thought it was the miners for a while, but I don't think it's necessarily the miners. And with Grayscale buying up as much as they're buying right now too, I honestly don't really know who's selling. It's probably not Craig Wright. Sorry, I just had to slip that in there. But yeah, I honestly don't know at this point. Do you have any ideas as to who it might be?
The only thing I can think of is it's, whales moving into other assets and stuff. I guess. I mean, I haven't gone forensic with it. I know if you look at a lot of like the old big addresses, like not a lot of stuff is moving there, and it's still mostly inflows rather than outflows. So it's just pure, like you, without a forensic eye on it, I just kind of think, well, lots of buying happening, and the miners seem to have dealt with the halving pretty well.
Yeah, because there was a
Um,
difficulty drop, but then it shot like right back up on this last adjustment, right?
yeah, and it's pretty volatile right now. There seems to be a lot of movement there. So I guess it could be, but it would make more sense to me that just whales are maybe shifting assets around, or who
Yeah,
knows.
just trying to get like dry powder, you think, or something, or probably not, I guess. I don't know.
I don't know. If you were a whale that could move the market, I mean, yeah, you would, right? I mean, you
Well, there
would
was
take.
like last week there, I don't know if you recall, there were like 2 or 3 days in a row, it seemed like, where the same pump happened at like the exact same time. And then it was just like a BART formation that dropped off like 4 hours later or something. It was like the exact same, like 2, 3 days in a row. So I was like, is
Right.
this just the same guy trying to do exactly that, just a whale trying to move it or what?
There's got to be a lot of that stuff happening, and I don't really begrudge it. I mean, it's free. You're free to play the market however you like.
Do you think it's people trying to shake people out before maybe a next bull run type thing?
Too hard to say. Too hard to
Yeah.
say.
Yeah.
What do you think of, because this comes up in the discussions I have with, kind of noobs about, typical FUD around Bitcoin. But what's your thoughts on distribution? We're talking about whales, and obviously a lot of early people got their hands on a huge, portion of the coin. How do you feel about Bitcoin's distribution?
I think it's probably just fine. I think a lot of the early holders are still holding because they have faith in the system. And if they were in it for a number go up, they probably would have sold at 17,000 in 2017. So I think a lot of the early holders that are still holding are going to continue to hold. And I think that they're probably in it more for the message because, I mean, Bitcoin in its origin, when there was the 50 block and even the 25 block, it was really kind of those libertarian cypherpunk type circles that do believe, I think, in that long-term kind of goal of a more free and individual society. And I don't think that those people would give that ideology or that dream up necessarily. So I think they probably just continue to hold, honestly. So it doesn't really worry me too much that we're down to what 6.25, I think, is the block reward now.
Yeah, yeah.
Yeah, it doesn't even really necessarily bother me too much. I think that coins have been distributed as much as they'll be distributed from the early holders, and people are just going to continue to hold. So
Yeah. And I mean, there's no other way to do it, right? I mean, there's so much about Bitcoin that just it's
you're too
almost,
incentivized to hold, man. You're too incentivized to hold.
well,
I feel
sure,
like
definitely that.
yeah.
But there's just so much about Bitcoin that it just happened. Like it almost seems sometimes like it couldn't have happened any other way. It snuck in the back door when nobody was looking, and it turned out to be that thing that people were looking for that they didn't know they were looking for.
Satoshi the
And
time traveler. Sorry to interrupt, but
yeah,
Satoshi the time
yeah,
travel, man.
yeah, exactly. I mean, it does sometimes seem like that because there are so many ways that it could have been derailed. There are so many ways that it could have just not worked out, but it just it did, and it did in the most poetic way in many instances, and that alone makes me think this has got to be it. That like this cannot not I shouldn't say that alone because that would be that's not sufficient to.
But it's been through so much already,
Yeah,
right? I mean,
yeah,
like think about
it,
like the
it
Silk Road and
contributes.
stuff, like how much of a blemish that was to so many people, and it just Bitcoin don't care. Like Bitcoin just keeps doing Bitcoin, and it just whatever tries to mar its opinion or public opinion, it just keeps doing what it does, and I think that continues to happen.
And it seems like it either turns you into a staunch advocate, or it fucks with you get a bad case of BDS, because the Bitcoin's history seems pretty littered with people who got in and thought they could control it, or they were bigger, or they were this or that, and it's still on full display in many cases. I
Yeah,
mean,
100%.
you know
what was
I
that
mean,
experiment, like the Pennsylvania or the Philadelphia prison experiment or whatever, where they figured anyone that got power would start to try to abuse it type thing? And it's kind of that same thing where like you just see these people who got clout in the Bitcoin space, unfortunately, try to leverage that into power and really kind of split things up and create some divisiveness. And it's unfortunate to see, but I think it's just human nature, unfortunately. So
yeah, I'm wondering when Roger is going to capitulate back, because presumably
man.
he's still, got a lot of Bitcoin on his hands. But um, I just that's one that blows my mind still. Every time I see a tweet, I'm just like, "Huh?
Yeah.
Still, man."
Yeah, I don't know, man. Especially because, like, I mean, he did quite a bit for like Bitcoin in the early day, and then just once he wanted to go a different way and it didn't break out, just seeing him kind of step away from the space, that was still when I was very much watching from the side. But that was something that I was just like, I watched that shakedown and thought it was pretty wild. So
Yeah. Now there's a lot of money at stake, and that means
yeah,
there's a lot of egos that get involved. And Matt Odell says it best, man. You stay humble and stack sats. And I think that's a good thing to remind yourself often, because you can arrogance and ego can seep into so many different areas of your life, and this is definitely no exception.
hmm
And if you really want to engage in it optimally, if you want to have the best outcomes, if you want to learn as much as possible, you I think it's great advice that you just got to keep that kind of beginner's mind mentality, so that you can continue to learn. Don't presume that you know a lot. Don't presume that you're in any way critical to the mission.
yeah.
Um, and
There's
like
so
you
many
said,
bright people in the space, man. I just don't see how anyone could think that, like, oh, I'm the brightest guy that's working on Bitcoin at this very moment, because there's just so many brilliant people in this space that no matter how, like how well versed you are in a certain aspect of your field, like you can learn something from people in this space. So
yeah. And I mean, it constantly humbles you too. I mean, like you're constantly reminded how much you you still don't know. And
mhm.
I'm not just saying that to pay lip service to it. Like, whether it's on the technology front, or whether, like, you can see so much the value of it, but still know that there's so much to know and there's so much to understand. Um, and I don't think that's necessarily necessary. Like, I know a lot of people who get it and they're cool with just getting it, and they take a position, and that's it. It doesn't consume that much of their mind space. Um, but if you really take the orange pill and fall down the
It's
rabbit hole, I mean,
endless. It's
this
endless, literally
endless to
endless.
learn.
You just like, oh, cool, I'm gonna get to this spot and I finally understand it, and you realize like there's so much more, and you just keep going, and you just like I can never see myself stop trying to learn about what's happening in the space or continue to try to learn ways that I can implement it in my own life to help better myself and my family type thing. So it's like it's totally endless. It's just one of those things that you'll just continue if it's something you care about and you think has a chance to succeed. It's just like you said, it's endless, man. So
Yeah, man, that's beautifully put. I think that's a great place to end it, unless you had any last words or comments before we shut it down.
no, I just really appreciate the time, man. It was great chatting with you and get to know you a bit. And thanks for the time.
Yeah, you too, man. All the best. You said 2 months for your sons on the way.
Yep. Yep. My second son will be on the way in 2 months. So looking
Awesome,
forward
man.
to it.
Well, congratulations on that. Hope everything goes well, and I'm sure we'll chat again in the future.
Sounds great. Thanks, John.